Rhetorical devices. The thing with rhetorical devices is that it is the very foundation of everything that you see, everything that you hear. Okay? When you write, rhetoric is at the base of it. Okay? When you speak, rhetoric is at the base of it. And it's not just in literature. It's in billboards, magazines, TVs, everything that you do. If you don't have a solid grasp of rhetoric and what makes that up, you're not going to be successful. I hear many times from kids, Miss Smith, I did the homework assignment, I read the story, how did I fail? And so I always ask them, I said, well, did you understand what you read? And they're like, well, no. If you don't understand what you're reading, it's because you're not understanding the rhetoric, because that's what it is. That's how it's tied together. So we need to make sure you understand the pieces so that you can understand what you're reading. All right, you will notice on your handout, you've already filled in the blanks. Okay? I have added to your notes. Okay? So I want you to go through and add onto your notes what I have added in yellow. Rhetoric, this is called the rhetorical triangle because it's made up of three things, rhetoric is. Okay? You've got your audience, you've got your logic, and you've got your emotions. Your audience is who or what your target is. If you don't have the correct target audience, you are always going to be ineffective. If you are sitting and talking to a class of science majors and you're talking about how great Harry Potter is, unless they're fans, they're ignoring you. Okay? Vice versa, if you're sitting in a Harry Potter lecture and you're talking about weather patterns, you're going to be absolutely miserable. You're not effective. You have to know who your audience is before you can do anything. Okay? The next thing you have to look at is your logic. You have to have facts. And I don't mean scientific facts. I mean things that are true. Now notice on here that I did put a question mark by things that are true. Okay. Raise your hand. Who can tell me why I put a question mark by the things that are true? All right, let me help you out. Give you an example. I read an article either Friday or this morning. I can't remember which article I read which day. But it was talking about the e-cigs and the vaping. Okay. And Michigan has passed a law that says that they are no longer going to be able to sell the vaping. The governor signed the law on Friday, and so it goes into effect within 30 days. And when I clicked on the article, this is where I found that information. It was talking about how originally the makers of the e-cigs they advertised it or said to the government, hey, the reason that we want to promote this is because we want a way for people who are addicted to cigarettes to wean themselves off. That's the truth, right? That's exactly what happened. What they may have left off is that now the e-cigs are actually twice as addictive as cigarettes, that they're actually worse for you than cigarettes. But were they lying when they told them that, hey, we want to get people off of cigarettes? No. And so that's when I say that you have to have logic to be careful with your facts, because that company was not lying. They just didn't tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So do keep in mind that logic can be biased in some aspects. Okay. You also have to have the emotion that ties with it. Okay. This is how you feel. So when we talked about that example with the vaping, and I used the example of, hey, when they're in the hospital and their lungs are filling with fluids and they thought it was pneumonia, and these are not old people. It was 18 to 23-year-olds is how many, that number 450 who died, those are 18 to 23-year-olds. Okay.
In the U.S. or like?
Yes. No, U.S. There were 3 in Tennessee, 8 in Illinois. I don't know how many in Michigan where it started, but this is why they're classifying it an epidemic. So, but I have to tell you that in order for it to work. If I just do logic, you ignore me because it's just facts. If I just said that people were dying from vaping, you'd ignore me that I was being over dramatic. I just wanted you to stop. Okay. For the rhetorical triangle to work, you have to have all of it. Okay. So please, please, please remember that. All right, we're going to do a practice. In order to convince the reader for anything, you have to have both logic and emotion. Okay. So for those of you that did the logic, I'm too busy. Well, I'm busy. Okay. And I still am able to get it done. You have to work. Well, when I was in high school, I had 3 jobs, and I was in AP classes, and I still got my work done, so it can be done. When you use just logic, someone will always have the opposite argument. Okay? Because it's not asking you to agree or disagree. It's saying that this is my fact, I have to work, I have to watch my siblings, I have to do this, I have a game. Okay? But, and then you've got the other facts that are the opposite. So if you always rely on logic, you will always lose. Same thing with emotion. Okay? For those of you that gave me the I don't cares and the I have more important things to do, that's all emotion. And so when you say it, it sounds like someone who's complaining or whining about something, and people tend to tune you out. To win, you combine them. Okay? So you would do, I have to watch my sibling. Okay, there's our logic. Because my parents have to work 2 jobs to feed us. So you've got the fact, right? Watch the siblings, and you're making me feel something for your situation. Okay? If I don't feel for your situation, it doesn't matter. The number one thing I used to get when I had honors and they had homework pretty frequently was, especially depending on the season, it was, Miss Smith, I have blank practice, whether it was football or basketball, or I had swimmers quite a bit one year. Do you know what time I have to be here for? And then fill in the blank for practice. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, okay, like everybody has other responsibilities. All you're doing is telling me what they are. You have to make me feel something about your situation to be effective. And that is the thing with rhetoric, with anyone, speeches, short stories, it doesn't matter. If you as a reader are not being pulled into the story, it's not being done effectively. Okay? And it doesn't have to be a good thing. It can be a bad thing. You can hate. Like with Gatsby. When we do Gatsby, I detest with a passion Great Gatsby as a character. But just because I hate him doesn't mean the book was horrible. It just means I don't like it. Okay? So as long as you are feeling something, the rhetoric is effective. Okay? If you're not feeling something, you're going to be missing what they're teaching with whatever piece of literature you're reading. That was last class. Okay. All right. These were the things I assumed you were going to say because it's things I've heard in the past, so we'll skip that. On your notes, okay, find where I'm at. Okay. It's near the very top where it says these devices you're familiar with. You've already filled in the blanks, okay, so you don't need to do that. What I am doing is I am explaining them to you for the reasons I've already talked about. Okay. You're not mastering them. Some of them I have given examples to, some of them I have rephrased. Either way, if you see my handwriting next to something, I need you to add that to your notes. Okay? So for repetition, I added 2 things. This example right here, and then this information down here. So I'm going to give you a second to write both of those things down. So for repetition, this is where you repeat a word or phrase. For example, Sally's hair is Sally's pride. Sally's in there twice, so it is repetition. When we were going around on Friday, over and over I heard kids say, there's no repetition in here. There's no repetition. By definition, it's when you repeat a word or phrase. So if it is in there more than once, it's repetition. It does not have to be in the exact same sentence. It just has to be close. Okay. Rule of thumb, I would say within 2 sentences. Okay. If it's at the beginning of the document and the end, I would say no. That's too far apart. Okay. But 2 sentences, I could give that to you. Okay. Things that do not count as repetition: and, or, but, the word the, a, this, that, etc. Words that have no real meaning. Okay. They have to be important words for them to count. Okay. So for those of you that were going, well, and is in here multiple times, it's not going to be a conjunction. It's not going to be the verb is. It has to be an important word. Okay. Personification. I had a lot of issues with personification, which really surprised me. So I added a little bit to your definition here to maybe help clarify. Feelings. Your object is going to feel something. So add that part to your notes too. So for the feelings, my computer hates me. Okay, my computer does not hate me. It's not working because I'm probably not doing something right. But I say it hates me. Okay, hate is a feeling. Objects don't have feelings. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be that way, but to help you guys who are struggling with personification, maybe that'll clarify. I think the example that we had in the story was it the wind running or something like that? Talking about the wind moving fast. That's not personification because it's describing how the wind is going. But if you had said the angry wind blew down the street, whatever, then that would work because the wind can't really be angry. Okay? So you want something not human, giving a trait that only belongs to humans. Imagery. Imagery is your easiest. Okay? You can say that pretty much anything is imagery. If you have a sentence or a paragraph and you're saying, this creates this picture for me, it's imagery because that's what imagery is. It creates a picture for the reader. Okay? All you have to do is say, well, I think that it is imagery because I see a picture of a hand. You're good to go. Illusion, I understand why you missed this one on the quiz, kind of. The illusion was the question with Mother Teresa, okay? When you have an illusion, you have a reference, meaning you're referring to someone else, okay? The problem is that if you don't have the background to understand that, it can cause problems. So for some of you, you may not have made the connection that they were talking about Mother Teresa, okay? There have been instances in the past. Last year, we were reading something, and it said Seuss's green eggs in the story, and I had a kid, he was like, I have no idea what they're talking about. And I was like, well, Dr. Seuss, green eggs and ham. And he had never heard it. So if they refer to something you've never read, it does kind of put you at a disadvantage. In all honesty, the only way to help with that is to read more. But if you do come to one that you don't know, we can always look it up and help with that. The next one is sarcasm. Now this one, on the surface, is really easy, but it's also really hard. It's really easy on the surface because we're teenagers and we like sarcasm. Okay? And so when people are talking, you get sarcasm because it's how you talk to each other. The problem is, in writing, it's not the same thing. So if I looked over there and I said, man, I like your hair today. It looks good. I mean, you can tell that I'm like, something's up, right? But on paper, if I had written on there that her hair looks good, it wouldn't have come across as sarcasm, right? The way to tell the difference between sarcasm and just a compliment in the case of Miss Hockenberry's hair is you would have to look at the context, okay? Sarcasm would be if the two characters were enemies, okay? An enemy would not be saying, I like your hair, okay? Whereas friends would. And that's how you kind of have to see it. is with the context. Now the one in red, I actually left off your notes on accident, so please copy both what's in red and the example that goes with it. Okay, alliteration. This is the repetition of the first sound. Not realizing I had forgotten it from the notes when I was helping last week, I was like, well, this is alliteration. And then, so I had to back up. But this is where you have the repetition of the first sound. It is not a letter. That's the mistake the kids were making once I said find the alliteration, is they were looking for a letter and they were going, oh, this one begins with a T, this one begins with a T. No, because it's not letter, it's sound. Peter Piper picked a pepper. The sound is the same. Ceilings spray dust. That's also the same sound. And ceilings begin with a C and spray begins with an S. Okay? So you have to be careful that you look for the sound rather than the letter. Okay? Now, I'm not saying you can't use the letter to guide you and then ask yourself, does this sound the same? But don't think only the letter. For the next one, simile. When we looked at the quiz a few minutes ago, number one was the simile. Okay? And you'll notice that there were only 4 kids that got it right. Okay? Just because you see the words like or as does not mean it's a simile. Okay? What you have to do is you have to look at the example and ask yourself, is this a comparison? If it's a comparison, determine which one. Is it simile, metaphor, analogy? Okay? If it's not a comparison, even if it's got the words like or as, ignore it. Okay? And that's where you messed up on the quiz, is you looked at similes and metaphors and you said, oh, I see the word like, it's a simile. I see the word are, it's a metaphor. And the examples on the quiz were not comparing anything. Those words were just in there. Okay? So please, on your papers, do the same thing I did, which is underline comparison or circle it, doesn't matter, I've done both. And then do the same thing to like and as and is and are. Okay? It is important to make sure you focus on the right part of the definition, which is comparison. Okay? Once you figure out if it's comparison, then choose simile, metaphor, or analogy. Okay? And I'll get into analogy on the next slide. Irony. Saying one thing but meaning another. Now, junior level, it doesn't matter the different types of irony. Okay? Freshman and sophomore year, I believe their test does break it down by different types. Here, all it's going to ask you to do is to discuss how the irony is effective, okay, or how is the irony used. So I did break it down by types, but I'm not going to ask you to differentiate between them. At the core, irony is a contradiction. Okay? You expect one thing to occur, but the opposite does. Okay? I absolutely cannot spell. If you have a spelling question, Ms. Huckleberry is your person. But I won the spelling bee. And that is so ironic. Okay? So you would never have expected someone who can't spell to win the spelling bee. Okay? Verbal irony is sarcasm. Okay? That ties back into what we said earlier about being able to find it. But it's where you say one thing, but you really mean something else. On paper, man, that dress looks really good on you. Sounds like that dress looks good. But when you say it, you know that that's not what you mean. So American Lit uses a lot of verbal irony, so we will have to practice that one. And then dramatic is where you, the reader, know something the audience does not. Anaphora. Based on our quiz, this is the one nobody got right. So I'm assuming that anaphora is new to you. The thing to remember about anaphora is it actually is just a type of repetition. Okay? In our previous example, Sally was repeated twice in the same line. Well, anaphora means that you start a clause or more than one clause in the same way. Okay? Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, I have a dream. Over half the speech starts out with, I have a dream. Okay? I have a dream that. I have a dream that. That is anaphora because you have started each clause with the same phrase. But it doesn't have to be like with what Martin Luther King did, separate lines. Abraham Lincoln did the same thing in Gettysburg Address. He said, but in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The beginning of each clause is we cannot. The clauses all just payment items in a series, so it's in one sentence. Okay? So just keep in mind that anaphora can come in the middle of a sentence if it's got like items in a series or a semicolon, something that combines clauses. If this was on a test or a project and I asked you to label it, if you labeled this repetition, it would be wrong. Okay? It must be labeled anaphora. Analogies. Analogies are hard for kids. I actually use analogies when I teach in order to help you understand things. A lot of times last year, I think it was 6th period, kept saying, Ms. Smith, why are you always off topic? And I was like, I'm not off topic. I'm using examples to help you. Okay? So if I start talking about my kids or something else that's happening, it's because I'm trying to make an analogy to help you understand a concept. So, for example, okay, so analogy. Here's an example of an analogy. I have a student in one of my classes who, when we were doing this work last week, he looks at me and he says, I'm not doing it. And so I'm like, okay, can you tell me why? And he says, I don't understand. So I said, okay, tell me what you don't understand. And his response was, I just can't do it. I don't think that way. And so we were looking at the repetition at the time. And I tried to explain to him again what repetition was. And he was like, I can't do it. I'm not doing it. So Ms. Hockenberry's in that class, and I called her over, and she tried to work with him, same thing. Okay, he can't do it. He's not doing it, and he put his head down. Okay. And so this weekend, I was trying to think of a way to help him, and so I thought of this comparison, and I actually told it to him this morning to try to help, and it seemed to because he worked pretty hard this morning. But I said, okay, think about me. You know, when I was pregnant, I literally could not move the cribs, and they're not that heavy, okay, with no mattress and all that. The cribs are not heavy at all. But I could not move, I could even push them across the room. Okay. So what I did is I actually went to a trainer and I started lifting weights. I had to have a trainer because being pregnant, you have to be very careful, okay. So I went to the trainer and I was doing weights. I still occasionally will, when I decide, hey, I probably need to do that again, go back and continue that. I am not a weightlifter. I am never going to be a weightlifter. I am never going to be a sports player. I am never going to be athletic. But I can pick up my 35-pound child. I can move the crib, okay? So that child, I don't expect him to be able to be an expert in these like I am. I do this all the time, okay? I've been doing it for 19 years. It is easy for me, okay? But I know I have a sports player in here somewhere. Okay, you guys could probably bench press more weights than I could ever dream of doing. That's not the goal, though. The goal is just for you to improve on these devices, okay? You may be like me with weights, okay? You may be able to pick up your kids, and that's about it. But it's still better than not being able to pick them up at all. Okay? And that's what I was telling him is, you know what, I can at least pick Aiden and Riley up. Okay? That's all I'm probably ever going to be able to do. I am 39 years old. I can pick them up, and I'm content with that. You guys will probably only be able to find them and maybe do a few, and I'm okay with that because it's still better than where you are right now. Does that make sense? That is an analogy. Okay? Do you see why analogies help? Okay? Because it takes something that you don't know, okay, applying something that you do know and showing you the relationship between the two so that your brain goes, I understand now. So please watch for analogies. Here's some examples I got from the internet. Notice on the second one, if you're going to eat fruits and vegetables grown with pesticides, you may as well throw yourself in front of a speeding truck. Now, second period spent like 20 minutes arguing over this one. It's just an example from the internet, okay? The thing that you do need to note, though, is that it is a hyperbole and an analogy. Many times, in fact, probably most times, rhetorical devices actually are more than one item. So write that down. One of the most common mistakes that kids make is that they go, oh, that's an analogy, and they move on. And they don't realize that it's also something else, and you have to label that something else. Rhetorical questions. These are probably the easiest to use, but you do have to be careful. On here, I had a question about what this meant earlier, so I basically rephrased it. It's a question in which the answer is applied or implied. On your notes, I want you to actually write down what I mean by that, which is you don't actually expect the audience to answer. Okay? You do not expect the audience to answer. The thing to remember about rhetorical questions, though, is they're good to use. You're not expected to answer. It's what you want them to think about as they're reading, whatever they're reading, a speech, story, whatever. But you have to be careful because you have to be 100% certain of what the audience is going to say. Second period, when we were doing our should we have homework activity, I had a student and he said, for his argument, he said, well, you don't want us to fail, do you? Now, he got lucky right there, okay? In that he did it correctly, but because obviously as a teacher, I don't want you to fail. But if you're not careful and you throw out that rhetorical question, then you're going to get your audience thinking of something else and you'll be ineffective. Okay, so he got lucky, he did a good job with it. Just make sure you're careful that whatever your rhetorical question is a question you want your audience to think about as we're reading. For what, here's some examples. For what can war breed, or sorry, back up. For what can war but endless war breed? Now, if I were to ask you to label this, you would obviously do rhetorical question, and then you would do repetition, because there's war, and then war can't breed. Humans can. And so you would label that personification. Okay. So this one line has three different, actually there's more, but I haven't taught parallelism yet, so that's why I didn't label it. Please be aware that they are frequently more than one device. Okay. Humor. Humor are funny things. They're done to create a connection between the reader and the audience. The problem, or reader and the writer. The problem is that most kids don't like to read, so you're not going to find things as funny. All I can ask you to do is try, okay? Because you're going to miss, especially when we do Mark Twain, you're going to miss some things if you don't try to go, okay, he's talking about, all these people stuck on a ship, but why is he thinking that's funny? Because it's Mark Twain. Hyperbole. Okay, please circle the same words on your paper that I circled on mine. Okay, so find hyperbole. Hyperbole is one of the most common devices used, very popular. It's also pretty easy. It's just where you exaggerate, okay? And the point of it, though, is to emphasize or give focus, and that's where you want to make sure you know why hyperboles are used. When you end up doing your project this 9 weeks where you have to use hyperboles, Use them, absolutely, they're great. But if you overuse them, if you use too many, you completely ruin your whole assignment. Hyperboles are good, they're common, they energize the reader, they add humor, they show differences, but you can't use too many or you ruin it. Okay. Examples. The planet is getting so crowded we may have to take turns sitting down. Obviously, that's not really happening, but it is saying that populations are increasing. Okay. Understatement. Understatement is, on the surface, a really easy concept, but every year it's the one where kids just don't get. Okay? They can't find it. And it's also one that almost everything we read has. And the problem is how do we find it? Okay? So I'm going to give you an example. If I tell you that Aiden is stubborn, that is an understatement. Okay? Well, how do you know it's an understatement? Okay? You have to look at context. So add that to your notes. To find it, look at your context. All right, so back to my example. Okay? Me just telling you Aiden is stubborn has no purpose. Okay? But if I tell you this, okay, I can't cook at all. So I took some cooking lessons over the summer, and so finally, first couple tries, we'll talk about those. But finally I got it to where the meal actually turned out really good. So I put the chicken on Aiden's plate with it's like angel hair pasta or something. And so I put it in front of him, and Aiden looks at me and he says, no. And I'm like, Aiden, honey, you have to eat. This is what we're having for supper. No. Yes, this is what you're eating. No. And I said, Aiden, you have to eat this. Mama is not cooking you anything else. No. Are you hungry? Yes, eat. Well, you have to eat chicken. No. And I said, that's fine, but I'm not cooking anything else. So either you're going to eat this or you're going to go to bed hungry. Okay? No. Okay. So I leave the plate on there. We eat supper. Riley eats it all. I eat all mine. Aiden didn't touch it. Didn't even try it to see if he liked it. He just didn't touch it. So I put it back in the fridge. Breakfast comes along, and here comes the chicken and the pasta. Aiden, it's time to eat. No. Aiden, you have to eat. No. Are you hungry? Yes, eat. Well, let's eat some chicken. No. Okay. He's 2. You can't argue with a 2-year-old. And so I'm like, okay, one more time, Aiden. You have to eat this. No. Fine. So I pack it back up, and I put it in the fridge. Lunchtime rolls around. Pull out the chicken. Aiden, time to eat. No. So for 3 meals, my child refused to eat. By this time, I'm feeling guilty because, poor kid is starving. So he didn't have it for supper that next night. But it was like, so when I say he's stubborn, that's an understatement. That kid will not do anything he does not want to do. And there is nothing you can do. You cannot discipline him. Spanking, times out, doesn't matter. You say, do you want a spanking? He'll go, yes, and take off his diaper. Okay? Aiden, do you want to get in trouble? Yes. You want to go sit in timeout? Yes, and he'll go sit in timeout. Okay. I do 1 calmly, and then I go 2, and if I get to 3, you're in trouble. He will count for me. Okay. So, but you see, you don't understand that he's stubborn unless you have the context of the story. So when you guys are looking for it in your stories, in your speeches, you cannot just look at the line. You have to look at what's going on. And it took me, if this was a story, probably a whole paragraph to describe Aiden, okay? And that's the same thing with yours when you do your short story that we're going to do probably on Wednesday, but maybe next week. It's the paragraph itself is where you find the understatement. It's one of those skills you've got to practice on because that one I put on your midterm and your final, okay? So please make sure that you can understand how to find the understatement. All right. I like my example better of Aiden, but if you don't, here's one. Leonardo da Vinci had a good idea or 2. Obviously, we know that that's an understatement. The Middle East is currently having some political squabbles. Again, understatement, lots of war over there. Antithesis. On your paper, please define the words that I defined for you. because that's where we had some trouble in the other class. So I'll give you a minute. I have defined contrasts for you in the definition. An antithesis uses strikingly different words to bring out opposite ideas. Okay? So uses very different words to bring out opposite ideas. A lot of times I tell the kids, well, think of yin and yang. Okay, you know that peace symbol? It's got the total opposites. Okay? That's kind of what you're looking for to find your antithesis. Okay? Kind, cruel. Okay? Hope, heartache. Okay? They're opposites. The words are opposites to show contrasting ideas. Examples, and the examples are in your notes as well. I want you to go ahead and underline them like I did. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. So you have small step and giant leap. Please make a note, write that down, that antithesis can be a phrase. Okay? Antithesis can be a phrase. It can also be content. Not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. So in this one, it's talking about what they look like on the outside, and this one is what they look like on the inside. Okay, so that's the contrast. War is not fought to achieve joy, but rather to avoid pain. So joy, pain, achieve, avoid. To err is human, to forgive divine. You've got err and forgive, which is mistake, human, and then divine. Okay. So you've got contrasting or opposite words to show contrasting ideas. All right, for oxymoron and paradox, I'm actually going to do those together because definition-wise, they're the same thing. They both show contradictory words or truths. How do you know the difference if you have a sentence and it's contradicting itself? Is it irony, is it paradox, or is it an oxymoron? Okay, because all of them by definition mean contradiction. Look at it. If it is these two words, not these two words like jumbo shrimp, but if it's two words, okay, back to back, it's going to be an oxymoron. Okay, so jumbo shrimp. Okay, jumbo is huge. Shrimp means small, but they're eating the jumbo shrimp. That really does make sense, right? Okay. It contradicts itself because shrimp can't be jumbo, but it's still true. So it's an oxymoron. The youthful grandpa was happy. That is also an oxymoron. Because grandpa, to be a grandpa, you have to be old. Okay. But youthful is youth. So the words themselves contradict, but yet it's still true. Okay, and so that's an oxymoron. Two words contradicting each other, most of the time back to back, that's going to be your oxymoron. Paradox. And if you look up here, I've underlined it. I actually added this last night to help clarify for you what a paradox was when I saw you guys were having trouble. So go ahead and add that to your notes, and I'll give you a minute to write that down. Essentially, with the paradox, the statement itself is contradictory. Okay? So the words contradict the sentence. An example, war is sometimes necessary to maintain a peaceful society. The contradiction is in the meaning of the words. So when you think about it, war, that's chaos, fighting, death, destruction, okay, is needed for peace. Well, wait a minute. Peace is where you have no fighting, only happiness. So how can war be necessary for peace? It's contradictory. But when you think about it, it's also true in some aspects, okay? That if something, sometimes you have to have people that say, you know what, we're willing to fight for what's right to keep the peace. And so it is paradox. A couple other examples of paradoxes. Your enemy's friend is your enemy. I am nobody. What a pity that youth must be wasted on the young. Let's see who can figure out the paradox of that one. I've had struggles with that one today. Look at Shaw's quote. Raise your hand if you think you can figure out how that one's a paradox. But it was a good try. When you think of youth, just like what you just said, you think of energetic, happy, always running, never having any problems, right? But when you're young, you make a lot of mistakes while you're learning. So George Bernard Shaw is saying all that energy that people who are young have is wasted on people who don't know what to do with it. They're too young to know how to live a full life because they don't know any better yet. So there's the paradox. Okay. The only way to find the paradoxes is to look at the sentence and go, well, what's the contradiction? You cannot find paradoxes any other way. They're really hard to find. So we will have to practice that one. Okay, that's going to be one of those weight things. Okay, we're going to have to start on 1-pounders. Okay. All right, and our last one is parallelism. Parallelism just means that your sentence is written in the same form. It is extremely important you understand parallelism because you will have multiple quizzes on it. You will have to write using parallelism. You have a project over parallelism, and there's 5 questions on the ACT on parallelism. Okay? This is that one skill that you absolutely have to make sure that you get. So parallelism is when you have the same sentence structure. Not necessarily the same words, the same structure. Okay? This is why I taught sentence structure first, so that when I use the word structure, in your mind you're going, okay, structure means the order the words come in the sentence. Okay? So parallelism is the same structure. On your writing, if you see from me the letters F and P, that means faulty parallelism, which means when you wrote the paragraph, it's not in the same structure. Okay, that's what you messed up on, and that's what you need to fix. The reason that parallelism is so important and why it's tested and you have so many assignments on them is because that's really the best thing you can do to be a strong writer. Okay? I'll show you some examples. Tobacco should be outlawed because it endangers everyone's health, pollutes the environment, and drains us of valuable energy. Present tense, present tense, present tense. Keep it. Don't lose it. All in present tense. Okay. In this one, Betty has intelligence, honesty, and she is funny. Now, for you guys, you're thinking, well, there's nothing wrong with that. You write like that. I have seen sentences like that from you. The problem is that this is items in a series, and they have to all be in the same format. So you would do, Betty has intelligence, honesty, and humor. Okay? So you have that same form. And I cut off the other example, so I can't use it. When you do lists, they need to be in the same format. In this one, you have subject, verb, object. You have adjective, subject. You have subject, verb, object, fragment. Okay. Nothing's the same. So instead, you do poor pay, long hours, tedious work, dangerous equipment. Modifier and your subject. Very nice. When you do a resume, and you will have to do a resume for whatever you're going to do, you need to have your resume parallel. Okay, it will stand out to every other candidate that comes in that says the boss may or may not know what skill it is, but it will stand out because parallelism adds clarity. Churchill says, I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. Okay, so you've got same form right there. Does not have to be the same word. The housekeeper looked inside the drawers, the bookcase, and under the recliner. This is a prepositional phrase. This is a prepositional phrase. This is not. So it has to be fixed. The housekeeper looked inside the drawers, on top of the bookcase, and under the recliner. Okay? So it does not have to be the same words, it just has to be the same form. Reading is to the mind what exercise is to the body. Okay? Notice that this example is not just parallel. You have your subject, your verb, your prepositional phrase. You've got your subject, your verb, your prepositional phrase, but it is also antithesis. Okay? Reading is to the mind what exercise is to the body. Those are opposite ideas, so you've got to label it both parallelism and antithesis. Hopefully this will help you, but if you have parallel structure, 99.9% of the time, it is also something else. It is very rare for parallelism to be by itself. Okay? So if you are labeling something parallel, you also need to look at it and go, what else is it? Okay? There's one example from Twain next semester that it's actually 10 different items. Okay? It's a long sentence. So you want to make sure that parallelism clicks, oh, it's also something else. These boys could name the types of trees, flowers, and some kind of birds. It has to match. So name the types of trees, flowers, and birds. That's the same type of example. All right.